My daughter looked me dead in the eyes and said her stepfather was more of a man than I'd ever be. She was 14 years old, standing in my kitchen in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and she said it loud enough that I'm pretty sure the neighbors heard it through the window screen. Not a whisper, not a slip. Loud and deliberate, the way teenagers say things when they want to make absolutely certain the knife goes all the way in. "You're a failure, Dad. Kyle isn't like you. I wish he was my real father." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't chase her down the driveway when she walked out to her mother's car. I just stood there in my kitchen holding a dish towel, and I made a decision that I knew would change everything. I gave my daughter exactly what she asked for. And 24 hours later, my ex-wife Diane was calling me in a panic that I hadn't heard in her voice since the night our marriage fell apart. But before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you what I did and why I did it and what it cost every single one of us, I need you to understand something about who I am. Because this story doesn't make sense unless you know where it started. My name is Eugene Halbert. I'm 44 years old. I work as a pediatric nurse at Wayne UNC Healthcare in Goldsboro, North Carolina. I have been doing this work for 16 years. I have held the hands of children going into surgery. I have sat with parents in waiting rooms at 2 in the morning and told them the truth when the truth was not good. I have done this job on holidays, on weekends, on nights when my own daughter called asking me to come to her school play, and I had to tell her I couldn't make it because there was a 6-year-old on the floor who needed me more. I tell you this not to make myself sound heroic. I tell you this because the story my daughter had been told about me, the story Diane had been quietly constructing for years, had nothing to do with any of it. Before we go any further, if this story is hitting close to home, if you've ever been the parent who got the worst version of themselves handed back to them by their own child, subscribe to this channel, leave a comment below, and hit that like button. You are not alone in this, and what happens next in this story is something every parent needs to hear. Diane and I got married when we were both 26. We had Reese 2 years later. For the first few years, things were good the way early marriages are good. Not perfect, but real. We had a house on Elm Street in Goldsboro, a dog named Pepper, and the kind of life that looks fine from the outside. But nursing is not a 9-to-5 job. It never has been and never will be. The hours are brutal, the emotional weight is crushing, and there were stretches of months where I came home too tired to be a husband in the ways Diane needed. She wanted vacations and dinner parties, and a man who came home before 8 o'clock and still had something left to give. I wanted to sleep and decompress and figure out how to carry what I'd seen at work without drowning in it. We didn't fight. That was almost the problem. We just slowly stopped being in the same marriage. By the time Reese was 7, Diane and I had separated. The divorce was final 8 months later. We had joint custody. Reese would spend the school week with Diane and alternate weekends with me, plus summers and holidays split between us. I accepted those terms because a custody lawyer once told me that the parent who accepts less is usually the parent who loves more. I'm not sure that's always true, but I accepted it because I believed Diane was a good mother, and I believed Reese would be okay, and I believed that what mattered most was stability. I was wrong about one of those 3 things. Diane met Kyle Forsyth about a year after the divorce. He was in commercial real estate. 43, twice divorced, never had children of his own. He wore slim-fit suits and drove a silver Audi and took Diane to restaurants in Raleigh that I couldn't have afforded on a nurse's salary without emptying my savings. I did not have an opinion about Kyle Forsyth. That was my policy. He was my daughter's stepfather. As long as he treated her well and treated Diane with respect, he was none of my business. What I did not anticipate was that Kyle Forsyth would become the measuring stick. It started small. Reese came home from a weekend with her mom and mentioned that Kyle had taken them to a beach house in Wrightsville Beach. "It was so nice, Dad. Like the nicest place I've ever stayed." I said that sounded wonderful. She described the outdoor shower, the rooftop deck, the seafood restaurant on the water where they sat outside and watched the sun go down. I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment off Berkeley Boulevard at the time. We watched the sun go down through a window that faced another apartment building. A few weeks later, she mentioned that Kyle had surprised her mom with a trip to Nashville for their anniversary. He just booked the whole thing. Didn't even tell her until the night before. I said that was very romantic. She looked at me the way teenagers look at you when they're deciding whether you've said the right thing. I had not said the right thing. The comparisons kept coming. Kyle had courtside seats at a Hornets game. Kyle knew how to cook a real steak. Kyle had a boat. Kyle's daughter from his first marriage was in her 20s and had a great relationship with him, which Reese mentioned approximately 3 times in one conversation. I said nothing. I did my job. I showed up for every pickup and every drop-off. I helped Reese with her homework when she let me. I drove 45 minutes to her school talent show and sat in the 3rd row and recorded the whole thing on my phone. I did all the things a father does that nobody films or posts or talks about at dinner parties. But none of that was the story being told in the other house. I found out through Reese, in the clumsy, accidental way you find out things through teenagers, that Diane had been telling her own version of our marriage for years. Not dramatic lies, something more corrosive. The quiet kind of rewriting where you slowly replace facts with feelings until the feelings become facts. According to the story in that house, I had been absent. I had prioritized my career. I had not shown up emotionally. I had never been ambitious enough. I had settled for less and dragged Diane down with me. None of this was discussed with me. It was just the water Reese swam in every day, and by the time she was 13, she was completely soaked through with it. I noticed the shift. Of course I noticed it. When she was 10 and 11, Reese still ran to the door when I picked her up. She wanted to show me things. She laughed at my jokes. She asked me questions about my work, about the kids I took care of, about whether it was scary to work with sick children. She told me I was brave for doing what I did. By 13, she had stopped running to the door. By 14, she barely made eye contact. I told myself it was just being a teenager. I told myself she was adjusting. I told myself the same things every divorced father tells himself when his daughter starts pulling away. That it's temporary. That it's normal. That it doesn't mean what it feels like it means. But then came the Saturday that changed everything. It was the first weekend of October, a Saturday, gray and cool, the way Goldsboro gets in early fall. Reese was supposed to spend the weekend with me. I had planned it out. Nothing extravagant, just the things she used to like. I bought the ingredients to make homemade pizza, which had been our tradition since she was 6. I had a new card game I thought she'd enjoy. I was going to take her to the farmer's market on Center Street on Sunday morning, the one she had asked to go to back in August. She arrived at 3 in the afternoon. I had the pizza dough ready. I said hello and told her I was glad she was there. She sat down on the couch and looked at her phone. I gave her space. I let her decompress. I finished getting the toppings ready and called her to the kitchen about 40 minutes later. She came in slowly, leaning against the counter, still looking at her phone. I started talking about the pizza, asking what she wanted on her half, and she said she wasn't really hungry. I said we didn't have to make pizza if she didn't want to. I asked what she felt like doing. She put her phone down and looked at me. And there was something in her face that I had never seen before. Not teenage irritability. Not distraction. Something harder. Something she had rehearsed. "Dad," she said, "I want to talk to you about something." I said, "Okay." I sat down at the kitchen table. Kyle offered to pay for my trip to Europe, the one the school is doing in the spring. He just said he wanted to do it. He didn't even think about it. I knew about the trip. It was a school-sponsored cultural exchange to Italy and Spain. The cost was $4,200. I had already looked into it and put $300 aside toward it and planned to work extra shifts over the winter to cover the rest. "That's very generous of him," I said. "He does stuff like that all the time," Reese said. "He thinks about us. He plans things. He makes sure we have what we need." I said I was glad her mother had someone like that in her life. "Why can't you be like that?" she said. I kept my face steady. I asked her what she meant. "You're a nurse," she said. And the way she said it, not mean, exactly, but the way you say a word when you want to drain all the value out of it, told me everything. "You work nights. You're always tired. You have this little apartment. You can't take me anywhere or do anything. Kyle has a real career. He actually succeeded. I let the words settle. Then I said, "Reese, do you know what I do at work?" She shrugged. "I take care of sick kids. Children. Some of them are your age. Some of them are babies. I have sat with mothers who were going to outlive their children, and I have helped them through that. I have held a child's hand through a procedure that terrified them so their parents didn't have to watch and fall apart. I have done that for 16 years. I chose that work because it matters to me." She looked at the counter. "That doesn't pay well enough to do anything cool." "Cool," I repeated. "You know what I mean." I was quiet for a moment. Then she said it. "You're a failure, Dad. Kyle isn't like you. I wish he was my real father." She said it the way I described at the beginning. Loud. Certain. Looking right at me. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I looked at my daughter for a long moment and said quietly and clearly, "All right, Reese. I hear you." She blinked. I don't think she expected that. "I'll call your mother to come pick you up, and I want you to think about what you said, because I'm going to honor it." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm going to give you what you asked for." 20 minutes later, Diane's car was in my parking lot. Reese walked out without saying goodbye. I watched from the window. Diane didn't come to the door. I stood in my kitchen for a long time with the pizza ingredients still spread out on the counter, and I thought about everything very carefully. Then I made 3 decisions. The first decision was about Reese. I did not call her that night or the next morning. I had been reaching out to her, texting, checking in, sending her things she might find funny or interesting. For years, across a distance that had been slowly growing. I had been pouring into a container with a hole in the bottom. That Sunday morning, I stopped. I did not disappear. I did not become cruel or cold or absent in any official way. I simply stopped chasing. If Reese wanted to talk to me, she could call. If she wanted to come over, she could ask. I was not going to beg my own daughter to want me in her life. The second decision was about Diane. I called my attorney, a family law practitioner named Gary Timmons, who had an office on William Street in Goldsboro. I told him what had happened. I told him I believed Reese was being influenced by a narrative about me that was fundamentally false, and that I had 16 years of evidence, shift records, school attendance records, medical records, text messages, voicemails, photographs, that told a different story. I asked Gary what my options were. He told me that what I was describing had a name: parental alienation. He said it was notoriously difficult to prove in court, but not impossible, especially with documentation. He said the fact that I had been methodical about keeping records for years was significant. I told him I wanted to review everything and be ready, but I didn't want to file anything yet. I wanted to see what happened first. The third decision was about myself. I had been quietly carrying shame about my income and my apartment and my life for years. Not conscious shame. I believed in what I did. I was proud of my work. But the low-grade ambient kind that seeps in when someone you love keeps measuring you and finding you insufficient. That Saturday, I made a decision to stop carrying it. I thought about my life clearly and honestly. I was a pediatric nurse with 16 years of experience. I had a clean record. I had skills. I had, over the past 3 years, been offered a position as a nurse educator at the hospital, a training role with supervisory responsibility and a significantly higher salary, and I had turned it down twice because I didn't want to leave the floor. I thought about it again. This time, I called the nursing director on Monday morning. Her name was Patricia Dunmore, and she had offered me the position so many times that when I called, she laughed a little before she said hello. "Gene," she said, "tell me you're calling about what I think you're calling about." "I'm ready," I said. We met that afternoon. The new role came with a salary increase of just under $18,000 annually, better hours, and a clear track for a director of education position within 2 years. I signed the paperwork on Wednesday. None of this was about proving Reese wrong. I want to be clear about that. The job change was something I had been putting off for personal reasons that no longer applied, but it happened the same week, and it was part of the same reckoning, and I won't pretend otherwise. 12 days after Reese left my apartment, Diane called. It was a Sunday evening, just after 7. I was reviewing orientation materials for my new role, eating leftovers at my kitchen table. I almost didn't answer. We had a communication arrangement. Parenting-related issues only, nothing social. But something made me pick up. Diane's voice was different. I had known that woman for nearly 20 years, and I had heard her voice in every possible register: happy, angry, exhausted, frightened. And what I heard when she said my name was something I hadn't heard since the night we sat in a doctor's office and got news we weren't prepared for. Raw, stripped down, panicked. "Eugene," she said. "Something happened." I put down my fork. Kyle Forsyth, it turned out, was not exactly who he had presented himself to be. I will tell you what Diane told me, in the order she told me, and I will not editorialize because it doesn't need it. Kyle's commercial real estate company had been under investigation by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission for approximately 14 months. The investigation concerned fraudulent representations to investors in a commercial development project in Wake County, a mixed-use building that had been sold to 4 separate investment groups using documentation that significantly overstated the projected value of the property. The amounts involved were, collectively, just under $1.2 million. The investigation had concluded. Kyle had been notified 2 weeks before Reese called me a failure that he was being referred to the state attorney general's office. Criminal charges were being filed. His license was suspended pending resolution. Diane found out because a reporter from the Raleigh News and Observer called her cell phone on a Sunday afternoon asking for a comment. She hadn't known, or she hadn't let herself know. I believed the first explanation then, and I still believe it now. Diane was not a dishonest person. She was a person who had decided Kyle was the man she needed him to be, and she had been very disciplined about not looking at evidence to the contrary. But there was more. Kyle, she told me in a voice that was barely above a whisper, had a daughter from his first marriage. A woman named Brittany, who was 27 and lived in Charlotte. Reese had met Brittany twice and described her as cool and successful. What Reese had not been told, what Diane apparently had not been told, or had not pressed on, was that Brittany had not spoken to her father in 4 years. Not because she was busy, because Kyle had borrowed money from her when she was 22, money she had saved working 2 jobs through college and had never paid a single dollar of it back. Diane found this out when Brittany's number appeared in Kyle's call log, and she called it. Brittany picked up and said flatly, "I don't know why you're calling me. I have nothing to say to anyone connected to my father. He stole from me, and he has no relationship with me, and that will never change." And then Diane said, the thing that I knew was the hardest thing she had ever said to me. Reese heard all of it. She was sitting right there when the reporter called. She heard me on the phone. With Brittany, she heard everything. I said nothing. "She has been in her room for 3 days, Diane said. "She won't eat much. She won't talk to me. She just keeps asking me why I didn't tell her the truth about you." I set down the papers I had been holding. "What do you mean?" "She asked me if it was true that you worked nights so we could have health insurance. She asked me if you had been at all her school events. She asked me if you had been paying child support consistently since the divorce. She asked me all of this, and I told her yes to all of it, and she cried for an hour." Diane's voice cracked on the last sentence. "Eugene, I think she's been told things that weren't fair to you, and I think I'm the one who told them." I let the silence hold for a moment. I was very careful about what I said next, because I knew this was one of those moments that would matter for a long time. "Diane," I said, "I'm not angry at you. I'm not going to use this. I just want to talk to my daughter." I drove to Diane's house the next evening. She lived in a neighborhood called Berkeley Hills, on the northeast side of Goldsboro. Nice houses, maintained yards, the kind of street where everybody knows their neighbors. I had been to that house dozens of times for pickups and drop-offs, always in the driveway, never inside. Diane met me at the door. She looked like she had not slept in several days. She stepped back to let me in, which was something she had not done in 6 years. Reese was in her room. Diane walked me to the door and knocked. "Reese, your dad is here." A long pause. Then the door opened. My daughter looked smaller than I remembered. That happens sometimes. You go a few weeks without seeing your child, and something about the next time you see them resets your eye, and you see them as they actually are instead of as the composite image you carry around in your head. She was in sweatpants and a hoodie. Her eyes were puffy. She looked at me and immediately looked at the floor. "Hey, kid," I said. She didn't say anything. I asked her if I could come in. She stepped back. I sat on the edge of her desk chair. She sat on her bed with her knees pulled up to her chest. There was a stuffed bear on the bed that she had had since she was 4 years old. A brown bear I had bought her at a gas station during a road trip when she couldn't sleep, which she had named Biscuit for reasons that were never fully explained, and she was holding it against her chest. We were quiet for a while. Then she said, "Dad, I said something really bad." "You did," I said. "I didn't mean it. I know you didn't. But you said it, and we have to be honest about that." She nodded. Her chin was trembling. "Can I tell you something?" I said. She looked up. "When you were 3 years old, you had a fever that spiked to 104 in the middle of the night. Your mom was terrified. We drove to the hospital at 2 in the morning. You were burning up and you didn't understand why we were there or why you felt the way you felt, and you kept asking for me. Over and over. Just, 'Daddy, Daddy, Daddy.' The nurses let me hold you the whole time they ran tests. I held you for 4 hours. Reese was very still. That was the night I decided to go back to school for nursing. I had been thinking about it before. But that night, watching the nurses, watching what they did and how they did it and the way they talked to you and to us, I knew that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the person in the room who knew what to do, who didn't panic, who made it okay. She was crying silently now. I chose a job that doesn't make as much money as some other jobs. That's true. I chose it because it mattered to me more than money did. And I would make that same choice again. Not because I don't care about providing for you, but because the work I do is real and it's important and I am good at it. Do you understand that?" She nodded. "I'm not a failure," I said. "I need you to hear me say that. I'm not a failure. I am a man who made choices, and most of them were the right ones, and I need my daughter to know who I actually am, instead of who somebody else told her I was." Reese put her face in her hands. The sound she made was not crying. Exactly. It was something older and heavier than crying. I moved from the chair to the edge of the bed and put my arm around her. She leaned into me the way she used to when she was small, when the world was too big and I was the safest thing in it. We stayed like that for a long time. There is something that happens in divorced families that nobody talks about at the beginning, when you're sitting in a mediator's office and dividing up holidays and signing papers. Nobody talks about the slow, invisible war that gets fought in the years that follow. Not a war with weapons or lawyers necessarily. A war of stories. A war of small, accumulated impressions. A war where the version of you that your child carries around in their head is shaped by 1,000 offhand comments and pointed silences and omissions you'll never even know happened. I had been losing that war for years, and I didn't fully understand how badly, until the night my daughter said Kyle Forsyth was more of a man than me. I don't tell you this to villainize Diane. She was not a monster. She was a woman who had been hurt and had spent years constructing a version of events that made her the protagonist of her own story. Most of us do that. Most of us build the story that makes our choices make sense. The problem is that when you do it inside a marriage and with a shared child, the story you build shapes someone else's entire understanding of reality. Reese had not been lied to in the dramatic way. She had been surrounded by a version of the truth that omitted everything inconvenient. And she had done what children do. She had filled the gaps with whatever she was given. In the weeks that followed the conversation in her room, Reese and I started over. Not perfectly, not without setbacks. She was 14 and she had a lot to process, and some days she was present and some days she was somewhere else entirely. But she started calling. She started asking questions, real questions, about my work, about what my days actually looked like, about what I had been like when I was her age. I answered everything honestly, even the uncomfortable parts. I told her that her mother and I had not made each other happy, and that neither of us was purely the victim or purely the villain. I told her that I had not always communicated as well as I should have. I told her that there were things I wished I had done differently. I also told her the things I had done right. The nights I had driven 45 minutes each way to be at events that lasted 20 minutes. The shifts I had picked up to make sure her school trips were covered. The savings account I had been quietly building for her since she was 7, which by the time she turned 18 would be enough to cover 2 years of in-state tuition without touching a dollar of financial aid. She did not know about the savings account. Diane did not know about the savings account. I had never mentioned it because it was not something I did to get credit for. It was something I did because it was the right thing to do. When I told Reese, she stared at me for a very long time. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she said. "Because you didn't need to know yet. You were a kid. I wasn't going to make you feel responsible for the future. That was my job." She shook her head slowly, not in disagreement, but in the way people shake their heads when something they have believed for a long time turns out to be wrong. Kyle Forsyth pled no contest to 3 counts of fraudulent misrepresentation in March of the following year. He was sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation, ordered to pay restitution to the investors, and permanently barred from holding a real estate license in North Carolina. Diane had ended the relationship the week after the story ran in the News and Observer. Their engagement, which I had not known about, which apparently Reese had also only found out about from overhearing a phone call, was formally called off. I did not feel satisfaction about this. I want to be clear about that because I know how this story sounds, and I know what people expect the divorced father to feel when the new husband turns out to be exactly what he secretly hoped the new husband was. But I did not feel satisfaction. I felt tired. I felt sad for Diane, who deserved better than what she had chosen. I felt sad for Reese, who had built part of her understanding of the world around a man who turned out to be hollow. What I felt, more than anything, was clear. Not right. Not vindicated. Clear. The way you feel when something that has been in your peripheral vision for years finally comes into focus. I had known, not the specifics but the shape, that something about the story I was living didn't match the story being told about me, and now the two were aligned. I moved into a house in January. Not a big house, a 3-bedroom on Royal Avenue in Goldsboro, a wide porch, a backyard with a fig tree, a neighborhood where people sat outside on warm evenings. Nothing like the Audi and the beach house and the rooftop deck, but real. Mine. Reese helped me paint the spare room. She picked the color, a deep green that she said looked like the inside of a forest, and we spent a Saturday afternoon with rollers and drop cloths and a playlist she curated, and somewhere in the middle of the second wall she started telling me about a boy at her school, a situation involving her best friend, some complicated social geometry that I did not fully understand but listened to very carefully, and I realized that we had not talked like this in years. I did not say that out loud. I just listened. Patricia Dunmore confirmed in April that I was being formally considered for the Director of Nursing Education position at Wayne UNC. I would hear the final decision in the fall. I told Reese about it over dinner. Tacos at my kitchen table, her feet tucked up under her on the chair the way she had always sat since she was small. And she looked up from her plate and said, quietly and very seriously, "I'm really proud of you, Dad." 3 words I had been waiting 14 years to hear from her, and when they came without announcement, tucked inside a Tuesday evening like they were the most ordinary thing in the world. I said thank you. I asked her if she wanted more salsa. She said yes. I have thought about what to make of all of this. I have turned it over 100 times looking for the lesson, the moral, the clean summary that makes it all mean something. The problem is that real life is not a clean summary. Real life is messy and slow, and the important moments often don't announce themselves until you're standing well past them looking back. What I know is this. I am a 44-year-old pediatric nurse in Goldsboro, North Carolina. I have spent 16 years helping children through the worst moments of their lives, and their parents through the worst moments of their lives. I drive a truck that is 7 years old. I have a house with a fig tree. I have a savings account that I built one deposit at a time every year for my daughter's future. I take the kind of satisfaction in my work that cannot be bought and does not depreciate and does not depend on what anyone else thinks of me. I am not a failure. I am a man who made choices, and those choices made me who I am. And I would not trade a single shift, or a single night, or a single conversation in a pediatric unit for a silver Audi and a beach house, and a reputation that turned out to be built on nothing. My daughter knows that now. And on the evenings when I sit on my porch on Royal Avenue and watch the light change through the fig tree, I sometimes think about the night I stood in my kitchen with a dish towel, and my daughter said the cruelest thing she would ever say to me. And I made a choice not to fight it. Not to argue, not to defend myself, not to chase her down the driveway and demand that she see me clearly. I gave her what she asked for. I stepped back. I let her go toward what she thought she wanted, and the truth, the actual, documented, undeniable truth, did what truth does when you stop obstructing it. It arrived. That is not a lesson I learned that night. It is a lesson my mother taught me when I was 9 years old, and I was upset because a kid at school had told everyone I was lying about something that was completely true. She sat me down at the kitchen table and said, "Eugene, you cannot chase people toward the truth. You can only live it long enough that they can't avoid it." I have thought about that a lot lately. I think she was right. My daughter called me last Thursday. She asked if she could come over Saturday to help me replant the fig tree. The roots have gotten too established for the spot it's in, and we've been planning to move it to the other side of the yard where it gets more afternoon sun. She said she was going to look up the best technique for transplanting established trees and make sure we didn't kill it. I said that sounded perfect. She said she'd be there at 10. She was there at 5 minutes to.